I pointed at it and shot. The statue flew back towards the wall, and I shot it again and again and again, until only pieces of it remained. Well, telling them how statues of Jesus had been trying to kill me would result in them locking me in a place for mentally ill patients. It depicted the body of a teenage boy, full of fractured exposed bones and contorted limbs. Some say he was simply found strangled to death with a rosary inside his bakery, others that he was also quartered with a cleaver. And the poor woman had been nailed to the crucifix on the wall. One of my sources claimed she had also been decapitated and her head exposed on the church's altar. Another statue of Jesus came to life and brutally murdered another member of the Pavlik, this time by defenestration.
Oh my god.
Welcome to another episode of Drawing and Telling Horror Stories with Mr. Beast. We draw while narrating these crazy stories. Today we have part 2 of Statues of Jesus Destroying My Family. We did part 1 not so long ago, and now we're doing part 2. Let's go. Statues of Jesus Killed My Entire Family. Part 2. The wooden boards covering the windows of my apartment were easily broken by the Jesus statue, as it effortlessly made its way into my apartment. I quickly got out of bed and grabbed my shotgun. That was already loaded and laying next to me. The statue advanced towards me, the hooks it had used to climb to my apartment on its hands. I pointed at it and shot. The statue flew back towards the wall, and I shot it again and again and again, until only pieces of it remained. I immediately had to change my pants afterwards. There is something in the absolute fear of facing death that throws your dignity out of the window. So, I had survived the first attack. It would only get harder from then on, I thought, as the police officers put me inside their car. I didn't even protest when they took my shotgun and apprehended me for reckless usage of firearms. Well, telling them how statues of Jesus had been trying to kill me would result in them locking me in a place for mentally ill patients, which are usually full of Christ imagery. I wouldn't live for much longer anyway. They locked me in a small individual cell in the back of the police station and told me to sit tight for the next 2 days or so as my case was being processed. I didn't have a lawyer, and I did not care enough to try to hire one at that point. It would be pointless. There was a small crucifix with a small Jesus on the corridor of my cell. It was a matter of time before that inanimate object became very animated and turned me into an inanimate object. So, you must imagine how surprised I was when one of the officers told me my lawyer was there to see me. I informed her I did not have a lawyer, but the policewoman told me someone had probably hired him for me. I asked her if she wasn't sure the lawyer wasn't a Jesus statue in disguise, but she just laughed. Trembling, I went to the meeting room for my possible doom. Luckily, the lawyer wasn't a disguised Jesus, but a priest who also happened to have a law license. Father Abraham Hudson. No, this is not his real name. He was an Englishman who seemed to be in his late 50s and yet on a great physical condition and spoke perfect Spanish, with no English accent at all. While talking to him, I discovered the priest was also a polyglot and a scholar. He spoke French, Czech, Latin, Italian, Spanish, English, German, Portuguese, and some basic Greek. Hudson told me the Vatican had been informed about my case and had discreetly sent him to investigate and figure out a solution. The curse that had been affecting my family, he told me, was extremely rare but not unheard of. There had been 3 other known cases in the past, and in one of them they managed to almost break the curse, and he was the one leading that effort. He showed me a Polaroid picture dated from 1991. It depicted the body of a teenage boy, full of fractured exposed bones and contorted limbs, being removed from the Seine River by the French police. He then gave me a copy of the file he had written when he worked on that poor boy's case in the 90s. I asked him if I could share it here, and he allowed me to, provided I change all names to fake ones. According to him, this file is the key to save my life. I'm writing this report to help us deal with future instances of this particular curse, should the need ever arise again. What we are dealing with is a terrible curse that eliminates entire lineages and uses figures of our sacred faith for nefarious purposes. Before we proceed, I must say that we failed on protecting Philippe Dessel, and that our failure in doing so costed him his life. However, his sacrifice shall not be in vain, as the knowledge we acquired with his case will certainly help us deal with similar matters in the future. The curse manifests in a simple yet dangerous way. Statues of certain saints come to life and attempt to murder members of certain bloodlines in any way they can, which are often very gruesome, before leaving a message written next to the body and seemingly vanishing. The statues can be of any size, and it appears that each statue has different abilities or strategies. These statues can still be destroyed, however, and there appears to be a cooldown between attacks from the possessed objects. If an attack fails for any reason, be it destruction or containment of the attacker, this cooldown occurs. It can range from 2 days to a month, or years, in earlier stages of the curse.
Oh God, oh Jesus.
Before we get to Philippe Dezel, we should discuss the reports about this curse that came before him, that I managed to locate in the Vatican confidential files. These were very old reports, and their states of conservation were far from ideal. The first instance occurred in the late 16th century, and there is not much detail, apart that it occurred in Portugal in the late 15th century, and resulted in the annihilation of a small village. I and other priests, several of them Portuguese, spent a lot of time looking for information about this one, but we couldn't find anything. Probably the documents, if there ever were any, are long lost or destroyed. The second known instance of the curse occurred in Prague during the early 17th century. The report simply says that a cardinal specialized in dealing with dark sorcery was dispatched from Rome to Prague to help deal with the curse that had been terrorizing a family of bakers, involving statues of Jesus coming to life. We have a bit more information about this one, but I had to do a bit of in loco research. I went to Prague and spent several weeks in local libraries searching for information. The tale had become something like an old forgotten legend. There were only a handful mentions in very old books. The most recent was a book of kids' fables, published in 1914. I found in total 4 versions of the story. I analyzed all versions and attempted to find common elements, prioritizing the oldest versions. And hopefully I could get as close to the truth as possible by doing this. The curse was inflicted upon the family of a baker called Pavlik from the neighborhood of Nowe Mesto. The reasons for this are not well known, but I found mentions of sawdust bread being sold in his establishment, although it's improbable someone would be cursed to such a harsh fate because of this. Pavlik was found roasted in his own oven, and someone wrote on the bakery's wall, Fata Hereticorum, the fate of heretics. Notably, a notorious stone statue of Jesus that resided on the square next to his bakery disappeared, and eyewitnesses claimed they saw the statue entering the bakery around closing hours. It's my personal theory that he could be a Protestant, which could be the reason for him being cursed, as Protestantism was on the rise during the time but was extremely rejected by the Habsburg dynasty. But this is just a theory, a religious theory. Regardless, Pavlik was the first victim of the curse that time, but not the last. Pavlik's son took over his bakery. That is, until circa 15 years later when he was found dead on the bakery. Sources diverge on how exactly he was killed. Some say he was simply found strangled to death with a rosary inside his bakery, others that he was also quartered with a cleaver. Regardless, the new statue of Jesus, that was installed after the first one went missing, was also lost. Then, the Pavliks moved their bakery to another neighborhood, believing it was the location of their shop, and not the family itself, that was cursed. They moved their bakery to the neighborhood of Star Msto, but the street they reportedly relocated to, Podvodnkova Cesta, seems to no longer exist, as I found no record of it. There, the Pavliks would find out that it wasn't their old bakery that was cursed, but their family. 7 years after the previous murder, the widow of the last baker was found brutally murdered in a local church. The statue of Jesus was missing, and the poor woman had been nailed to the crucifix on the wall. One of my sources claims she had also been decapitated and her head exposed on the church's altar, but the others do not confirm this information. What all sources do agree is that Fata Hereticorum had been carved on her chest. The statue of Jesus of that church was nowhere to be seen. At this point, the family came to a local church and begged for help. People had been avoiding them, afraid of being cursed too, and their business was drowning in debt, as no one wanted to sell them wheat or meat. And no one wanted to buy anything from the cursed family. The Archbishop asked the Vatican to send a specialist in curse breaking, and the Vatican sent a cardinal. Although nothing else is confirmed, there is indeed a letter in the Vatican files from the Archbishop of Prague requesting help to deal with a curse of statues afflicting a family. So even if we can't verify the veracity of most other history, we do know at least the call for help existed. Now, the end of the story gets messy, and we do not know with certainty what happened. The newest sources claim that the Vatican priest was able to save the family, spending 7 days and 7 nights in an exorcism ritual that costed him an eye. No other members of the family perished by the hand of a Jesus statue, but they were so traumatized by all the events that they decided to leave town, and no one saw any of them ever since. In my personal opinion, this ending is probably untruthful, as I'm certain that the Cardinal would write a detailed report if he had indeed lost an eye in an exorcism. Aggression against priests during exorcism rites is somewhat common, but almost never to such an extent. The end of the Pavliks, according to the older sources, was a bit more tragic. Even before the Cardinal arrived in Prague, another statue of Jesus came to life and brutally murdered another member of the Pavlik, this time by defenestration.
Oh my god.
The population then decided that the Pavliks were not only cursed, but they were infecting the city with evil, and then they lynched the family and burned their house and bakery down. Sadly, I think this is way more probable, and the reason that the Vatican has no further reports about this case, I reflect, it's because there was no one left there to save, as the Pavliks had all been murdered. In the case of Philippe Desel, I was able to observe the case in person. The whole reason I spent weeks in Prague was because I wanted to save him by studying the previous iterations of the curse. However, even if I wasn't able to save him, I have reason to believe I was very, very close to doing so. Desel's ancestor, Jean-Michel Desel, was one of the top lieutenants of Jean-Baptiste Carrier during the height of the Reign of Terror of the French Revolution. He was personally responsible for rounding up Catholic priests and nuns, and anyone suspected of aiding the pro-monarchist Vendée insurrection, or even related to anyone who rebelled. These people were subsequently either drowned en masse in the Loire River, shot, or guillotined. After the fall of Robespierre, Jean-Michel Desel was tried along with Carrier for war crimes and guillotined. Fearing reprisals, his family moved away from France and only returned during the last years of the reign of Napoleon. Apparently, one of the reasons that made them move back to Paris was when, around 1813, one of their family members was found brutally murdered in the city they were currently living. But I wasn't able to find many details about this death. Then, in 1821, another member of the Desels was found dead. In this case, I was able to locate the original report in the files of the police prefecture of Paris. Clotilde Marie Desel, daughter of Jean-Michel Desel, was working by selling flowers on the street when was stabbed to death by a person that was reportedly disguised as the Blessed Virgin Mary. This aggressor wrote Justitia pro Vendis using Clotilde Marie's blood before jumping into the Seine River and disappearing. Eyewitnesses were so shocked and scared they didn't do anything, probably suffering from some form of bystander effect. In 1826, another member of the Desel family was killed by a person reportedly disguised as the Blessed Virgin Mary in a lavender field in southern France. Although this time I wasn't able to find the cause of death and where it took place exactly. Then, the time span kept getting shorter. In 1828, another Desel was found dead, this time drowned in a puddle after a night of heavy rain. Justitia pro Vendée had been written with chalk on the door of his house. And in 1829, another death occurred when Marinette Desel was murdered by a person dressed as the Blessed Virgin Mary, who killed her with its bare hands by breaking her neck. However, this time a policeman called François Delacroix was there. The officer went after the murderer, but to his shock, when he hit it with his baton, he discovered he had hit a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary that was moving like it was alive. The statue ran away, and Delacroix chased it, but when the statue turned into a corner, it disappeared. Delacroix wrote a detailed report to the Paris police prefecture, but he was deemed insane and his license was revoked. In 1832, 3 more deaths had occurred, one of them extremely brutal, involving 2 of the Desels being dismembered and then sewn back together in a single horrendous human corpse. The police tried to investigate the case to no avail, but it appears that Delacroix decided to conduct his own independent investigation. Most of the information concerning Jean-Michel Desel had been lost after an angry mob invaded the National Convention and either stole or burned the files concerning the Desels trial in the Insurrection of 12 Germinal in 1795. The information that I gathered about Dessel being a top lieutenant of Carrier and participating in the atrocities of Vendée was actually uncovered by Delacroix after he interviewed people that had lived through these tumultuous times. The fact is that the Dessel family, which was very large, as Jean-Michel had 13 children, and each of these children would end up having at least one child, did not know the involvement of their ancestor with the Reign of Terror. This information had been hidden by the late wife of Jean-Michel Dessel, who was also probably the first victim of the curse. Then Delacroix, who over the course of his investigation involved himself romantically with a member of the Dessel family and feared that he was himself now a possible victim, sent letters to the church asking for help. The church sent an Italian exorcist, who Delacroix simply identifies as Father Giuseppe, to aid in solving the curse. After several failed exorcism attempts and 4 more violent deaths, Father Giuseppe found a way to save the family. Once a year, the family would have to visit the place where the victims of their despicable ancestor had been laid to rest and apologize. They managed to get there and do so, but during this voyage, the curse struck as never before, and 5 family members were killed in the span of a week.
Oh my god!
After the apology, however, the murders stopped. Delacroix himself was murdered, but his now widow kept his diary. It was stored in the Dessel's cellar. Fast forwarding to the 1970s, for some reason, the Dessels stopped doing the ritual of visiting the Loire River. Most of the information in this part comes from interviews I conducted with Philippe Dessel. Maybe after the May 68 protests, the family decided that it was an outdated tradition derived from a forgotten legend. Regardless, when I discovered how to stop the curse, Philippe was already dead. In 1977, Jeanne Dessel, the grandmother of Philippe, was found hanging from her ceiling. She had been brutally mutilated, and the statue wrote Lustitia Provende on the floor among her remains.
Holy
Then, on 1985, Maurice Dessel, the father of Philippe, was found frozen to death. He had been put inside the family's freezer, and the door had been chained. The phrase Lustitia Provende had been written with chalk on the freezer. And in 1989, Christine Dessel, mother of Philippe, was found headless in her bed.
Oh god, oh
The
Jesus.
phrase Lustitia Provende had been written with her blood on the wall above her bed.
Oh my god.
Until that point, Philippe and the police were treating the case as some kind of murderous cult or serial killer. The case of Issei Sagawa was still fresh in the mind of the Parisians. When Philippe barely survived an attack by a small wooden figure of the Blessed Virgin Mary, he came to the church for help. At the time, I was studying unrelated subjects in the Catholic Institute of Paris, and one of my superiors sent me to help Dessel. We put inside our most secure room in the basement of one of our churches near Paris that was used as a stronghold during the Middle Ages. And I personally hired a security team to protect him while we looked for a way to save him from the curse. But I must say that I made a grave mistake and utterly failed in assisting Philippe. I went to Portugal and then to Prague, and spent months looking for ways to save him by looking into the past. I focused so much in the past that I did not see what was right in front of me all along. After spending 2 months surviving attacks from crazed statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary, including some very close calls, Philippe decided to head back home and die in dignity. He had given me a key to his house so I could search it for clues. But I didn't. I believed that his family would hardly have something which could help me. And when I came back and finally looked around his house and found the diary, he had already been murdered. As I finished reading the report, I looked at Father Abraham Hudson and thanked him. I now knew what I had to do and where I had to go. I just needed to wait 2 more days now, and I would be free to do it.